The room was cold, dark, and silent. The alien girl sat with chains around her wrists, her back pressed against the steel wall. She had been captured during the last battle, a battle her people had already declared lost before it even began. Now she was alone, deep inside a human warship, surrounded by legends that had haunted her since childhood. Her people always told stories about humans. They said humans were monsters, beings who devoured the flesh of their enemies and drank the blood of the fallen. Children were frightened into obedience by these stories. She had believed them all her life, and now, as she waited in this cold cell, she was certain the stories were about to come true. The door hissed once, then remained closed. She tightened her grip on the chains, her claws scratching the metal floor. Her eyes, glowing faintly in the dark, searched the shadows for movement. Every sound, the hum of engines, the drip of water from a leaking pipe, felt like the whisper of death. Minutes stretched into hours. Fear twisted her stomach, but she forced herself to remain still. If she showed weakness, the humans would enjoy her suffering even more, or so she believed. At least, that was what her people always said. Then, without warning, the heavy door slid open. A figure stepped inside, tall and broad, his armor catching the dim light. She could not see his face. It was hidden in the shadows cast by his helmet. Her heart pounded so hard it echoed in her ears. This was it, she thought. The moment she would be torn apart. The human did not speak. He carried something in his hands, and for a heartbeat, she thought it was a blade. But when he came closer, she saw it was a tray. Food and a bottle of water rested upon it. Her mind raced, confusion battling with fear. He placed the tray on the ground before her. Slowly, carefully, as if not to frighten her, she stared at it, then at him. Her sharp teeth bared in warning. "Is this poison?" She whispered, her voice trembling. The human tilted his head but said nothing. He only took a step back, keeping his distance. For a long moment, she did not move. She thought of the tailies again. The humans would feed their prisoners before killing them, to fatten their flesh. Her stomach growled, betraying her hunger. She wanted to resist, but the smell of food filled the air. Still, she did not trust it. Not yet. The human remained silent. He did not laugh, did not threaten, did not touch her chains. He simply waited in the corner, his helmet still hiding his face. Finally, she pushed the tray away with her foot, snarling, "I will not be your meal." She spat. He gave no answer. Instead, he stepped forward, pulled the tray back toward her, and set it within reach once more. Then he turned and left the cell, the door closing behind him with a hiss. The silence returned, but it felt heavier now. She was left with food she dared not touch and a question she could not escape. Why had he not killed her? Why had he not even spoken? She hugged her knees and closed her eyes, but sleep would not come. Every heartbeat reminded her of the human's calm, silent presence. He had looked at her like no predator she had ever seen. It was not hunger in his movements, but something else, something she could not name. When the door opened again hours later, she jolted awake. It was the same human, the same silent figure in armor. This time he carried no food, only a blanket. He placed it beside her and then began tending to her wounds. His hands were steady, his movements careful. She flinched when he touched her arm, expecting pain, but instead he wrapped the bandage gently. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Why?" Still, he said nothing. Only a faint breath escaped his helmet, like a sigh too heavy to carry words. When he finished, he left her again, leaving her with more questions than before. In the stillness of the cell, the alien girl began to tremble. Not from fear, but from doubt. Could it be that the stories were wrong? Could it be that humans were not monsters, but something else entirely? She hugged the blanket to her chest, warmth spreading through her cold body. For the first time since her capture, she felt a spark of safety. But safety was dangerous, because safety meant hope, and hope was the most painful weapon of all. Her eyes lifted to the door where the human had disappeared. She whispered into the shadows. "What are you?" The silence did not answer, but somewhere deep in her heart, she felt the first crack forming in everything she had ever believed. The hum of the warship's engines filled the cell like a never-ending drum. The alien girl sat in silence, clutching the thin blanket the human had left for her. It was soft against her skin, warmer than the cold steel walls, and every time she pulled it tighter, she felt a sting of shame. Why was she accepting comfort from the very creature her people called a monster? She told herself it was a trick. Humans were clever hunters. They softened their prey before the final strike. That had to be the truth, she thought, because the alternative was impossible. The alternative was that the stories her people repeated for generations were wrong. Hours passed before the heavy door hissed open again. She flinched, her claws ready, though she knew the chains would not allow escape. The same human entered, his armor dull under the flickering light, his helmet hiding his face. This time he carried nothing, his hands empty, and that frightened her more than before. He walked closer, his boots echoing against the metal floor. Her heart raced, every instinct screaming that this was it, the moment she would die. She bared her sharp teeth, ready to fight until her last breath, but instead of raising a weapon, the human crouched low and slid the food tray toward her again. The smell of bread and roasted grain rose into the air. Her stomach betrayed her with a growl, but she forced her eyes to stay locked on him. She whispered, her voice tight with suspicion, "Why do you feed me? So I taste better when you eat me?" The human tilted his head slightly, as if puzzled, then shook his head slowly. His silence unnerved her more than any roar of a beast could have. Why would he not answer? Why would he not defend himself against her accusation? He simply pushed the tray closer, his gloved hand steady, before leaning back. Every action was calm, every movement deliberate, not the way of a predator taunting its prey. She stared at him for long moments, her mind pulling between hunger and fear. Finally, she snatched a piece of bread and tore into it with trembling teeth. The taste was real, not poisoned, not laced with anything strange. It was simple food, human food, given freely. When she looked up again, the human was still there, crouched and watching her carefully. Not like a hunter watching his catch, but more like a guardian ensuring she ate. Her voice cracked as she whispered again, "When will you eat me?" The question echoed in the cell, heavy and trembling. For the first time, the human spoke. His voice was low, quiet, but strong, carrying through the still air like a shock. "Never," he said. "I don't harm the helpless." The words froze her completely. She blinked, her throat tight. Her people had sworn that humans were cruel, merciless, born from chaos and violence. Yet here he was, saying the exact opposite. She wanted to laugh, to scream, to deny it, but his tone was not the voice of a liar. Her claws loosened against the chains, her shoulders dropped. Something heavy inside her chest shifted, as though a wall she had always leaned against was starting to crumble. If he spoke the truth, then everything she believed, everything she had been taught was a lie. She whispered back, "Then why keep me alive? What do you gain?" The human paused, as if he considered answering, then slowly replied, "Because mercy is stronger than fear." The words cut deep into her mind. She could not understand them, not fully, but they clung to her like the blanket she held. The human stood, collected the empty water bottle, and without another word, left the cell once more. The door hissed closed, leaving her in silence again. But this silence was different from before. It was no longer filled with dread. Now it was filled with questions, dangerous questions. She wrapped the blanket tighter and leaned back against the wall, her mind spinning. For the first time since her capture, she was not thinking of her death. She was thinking of his words, repeating them again and again. "Mercy is stronger than fear." She whispered the phrase into the darkness, as though testing its weight. Her heart, once heavy with terror, now beat with something unfamiliar, not trust, not yet, but curiosity. a spark of something she had never felt toward a human before. As the ship drifted through the endless void of space, the alien girl closed her eyes. Her chains were still cold, her body still weak, but her spirit trembled with new possibilities. Perhaps the galaxy was not what she thought it was. Perhaps the monsters she feared were not monsters at all, and perhaps the most dangerous truth of all was that the human had not saved her to feed on her flesh, but to save her soul. The cell lights flickered faintly, throwing long shadows across the steel walls. The alien girl sat curled in the corner, her knees against her chest, the blanket still wrapped tightly around her. She had tried to sleep, but every creak of the ship reminded her of the predator who walked these halls. Humans, the devourers, the nightmares of every story she had been told since childhood. She had expected death to come quickly. Instead, it came slowly, in the form of silence and waiting. That was worse than the bite of a blade. Her thoughts churned until her body ached. Then came the hiss of the heavy door. Her heart jumped, claws flexing instinctively, though she knew the chains made her powerless. The same human entered, armor-clad, face hidden behind the dark visor of his helmet. The weight of his presence filled the small cell. He carried no weapon this time, no instruments of torture, only a small tray of food and a bottle of water. The girl bared her teeth, her voice rough. "Do you mock me with this? Feed me so my flesh tastes better?" The human paused, crouched, and placed the tray carefully in front of her. He didn't answer her taunt, didn't even raise his head. Instead, he pushed the tray closer and leaned back slowly, as though giving her space. Her stomach twisted with hunger, the smell of baked grain rising into the cold air. But pride and fear fought inside her chest. If she ate, she admitted weakness. If she refused, she would starve. And the humans would laugh as she withered. She snatched a piece of bread and tore into it with sharp bites, her eyes never leaving the man before her. The food was real, simple, not poisoned. Each bite was a betrayal of everything she believed. But her body demanded it. The human stayed crouched, silent, watching. Not like a predator waiting for its prey to fatten, but like a guardian making sure she lived through the night. Her throat tightened, words slipping out before she could stop. "Them, when will you eat me?" she whispered, half challenge, half fear. The silence stretched, heavy, suffocating. Then his voice came, low and steady. "Never," he said. "I don't harm the helpless." The words struck her like a blade of fire. She froze, her sharp eyes wide. Every story her people told said humans were merciless, that they took joy in suffering. But the tone in his voice was not the voice of cruelty. It was firm, honest, carrying the weight of truth. Her mind rebelled. No, it had to be a trick. Mercy was not in the nature of monsters, and yet, here he was, speaking of it as if it were the most natural thing in the universe. She growled softly, her pride refusing to bend. "Why keep me alive then? What do you gain from this?" The human didn't answer right away. He looked at her for a long moment, then finally said, "Because mercy lasts longer than fear." Her chest tightened, her breath catching. Those words echoed against the walls of the cell, echoing inside her heart. Mercy lasts longer than fear. Her people had never spoken of mercy, only dominance, blood, and vengeance. But here stood a creature she had been taught to hate, speaking of compassion as though it were strength. He stood slowly, collected the empty water bottle from the corner, and without another word, turned to leave. The door hissed shut behind him, sealing her again in silence. But the silence was not the same as before. It was not filled with terror. It was filled with questions she could not answer. She leaned back against the wall, clutching the blanket, her claws trembling slightly. His words would not leave her mind. "Mercy lasts longer than fear." She whispered them softly into the dark, testing their taste on her tongue. It felt strange, foreign, but powerful. For the first time since her capture, she was not thinking of her death. She was thinking of him, the silent human who brought food instead of pain, who spoke of mercy instead of cruelty. And deep within her chest, beneath the layers of fear and hate, A dangerous seed was planted. Not trust, not yet, but curiosity. The kind of curiosity that could change everything she thought she knew. Asterisk. The hours after his words felt longer than entire days. The alien girl sat in her chains, whispering them again and again. Mercy lasts longer than fear. They echoed in her mind like a forbidden song. Every time she repeated them, her chest tightened, because they clashed with everything she had been taught. Her people had never spoken of mercy. To them, kindness was weakness, and weakness was death. Yet the human had not killed her when he could have. He had not even raised a hand against her. Instead, he left her with food, water, and words that burned into her very soul. When the door hissed open once more, she expected another trick. Her body tensed, ready for pain, but what entered was something she had not imagined. The human soldier stepped in with a small kit in his hand. Inside were bandages, antiseptic, and strange human tools for healing. She froze, her claws flexing, her lips curling back. "Stay away," she hissed. He said nothing, only knelt in front of her, the armor creaking slightly. Gently, he reached for her arm. Where bruises and cuts marked her pale skin, she tried to jerk back, but the chains pulled her short, the iron biting into her wrists. He didn't force her, didn't tighten his grip. He simply waited, his hand hovering just close enough for her to see his intent. Her heart raced, every instinct screaming at her to resist. But something in his silence unsettled her more than any weapon. He was not acting like a monster, he was behaving like a protector. Slowly, against her own will, she allowed him to touch her arm. The bandage was wrapped carefully, each pull steady, each knot precise. Her eyes never left his hidden face. "Why do you do this?" she whispered, her voice raw. "You gain nothing by helping me." The human didn't answer at first, only finished tying the last knot. Then his voice came, low and steady. "Because pain does not have to be the only truth." The words stunned her. Her people believed pain was power, pain was life. But this human spoke of something different, something her mind could barely grasp. It was not weakness in his tone, it was strength. An iron strength wrapped in compassion. She pulled her arm back, hugging it close, staring at the clean white bandages. Confusion twisted inside her like a storm. She wanted to hate him. She wanted to spit in his face. But deep inside, a small voice whispered the unthinkable. What if the stories were lies? The silence between them stretched, heavy, unbroken, except by the sound of her breathing. Finally, she spoke again, her voice trembling but sharp. "When will you eat me? Tell me the truth." The human turned his head slightly, and though she could not see his eyes, she felt his gaze cut through her. "I told you already," he said firmly. "Never." She flinched at the strength in his tone. It wasn't the roar of a predator, it was the command of someone who believed every word he spoke. For the first time in her life, she did not hear a lie in a human's voice. That frightened her more than any weapon could. The human packed away his tools and stood, towering over her once again. For a heartbeat, she thought he might strike her now. But instead he turned toward the door. Before he left, he paused, his voice softer than before. "You are not my enemy here," he said, then stepped out into the corridor. The door sealed shut, leaving her alone again. But the silence no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a question, an unfinished sentence, waiting for her to answer. She sat there trembling, clutching the blanket. Her fear was still there, sharp and deep. But something else was beginning to grow inside her. It wasn't trust, not yet. But it was something more dangerous than fear. It was doubt. Doubt in her people's stories, doubt in her hatred, doubt in herself. Her claws tapped nervously against the floor as she whispered into the darkness, "What are you, human?" The cell gave no answer, but her heart beat with a rhythm she had never felt before. Not the rhythm of prey waiting for death, but the rhythm of someone who had seen a spark of truth. She pulled the blanket tighter and closed her eyes. For the first time since her capture, she did not dream of her death. She dreamed of his words. His steady hands and the voice that had told her mercy was stronger than fear, and deep within her soul, the first cracks of change began to spread. Her fear was breaking, and in its place, something far more powerful was being born. The days inside the human ship blurred together. The alien girl had lost all sense of time. She didn't know if the stars outside the hull were moving, or if she was trapped in one endless night. But she did know one thing: her fear was no longer the same. The human kept returning. Always in silence, always with purpose. He brought food, water, and blankets when the cell grew too cold. Sometimes he tended her wounds. Sometimes he just sat quietly in the corner while she ate. He spoke very little, but his presence said more than words ever could. At first, she told herself it was only another trick. Humans soften prey before striking. That was the story of her people. But each day he left without harm. Each day he returned with the same calm hands. And the lie inside her mind began to crack. His silence no longer felt like the silence of a predator. It felt like the silence of someone who had nothing to prove. One night, when the engines groaned through the metal walls, she finally dared to ask, "Why do you come back? Why not let me rot here?" The human looked at her, his visor reflecting her tired eyes. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then finally he said, "Because no one deserves to be forgotten." The words sank deep into her chest like a knife of light. Her people never spoke of such things. To them, enemies were erased, not remembered. Yet this human, her so-called monster, spoke as though every life mattered, even hers. The bond between them began in silence, a fragile thread, woven not from trust, but from the absence of cruelty. She found herself waiting for him, straining her ears to hear the hiss of the door each time. When he came, her chest eased. When he left, the silence felt heavier than before. Once, when he brought her food, she whispered without thinking, "You are strange." He tilted his head, but she continued, "You do not act like a monster." He didn't smile, didn't laugh. But he placed the food down gently and said only one word. Then he left, and the word lingered in the air like a strange kind of victory. But their bond was tested soon after. Two other humans entered her cell one day, their faces uncovered, their voices sharp. They looked at her with hatred, as though she was not a prisoner, but a disease. One of them spat, "Why is this creature still breathing?" Better to throw her out the airlock. Fear surged in her chest, stronger than before. For all her doubts, for all her questions, she suddenly remembered what humans were capable of. Before the soldiers could reach her, the armored human stepped into the room. His voice, though quiet, carried the weight of command. "She stays," he said firmly, blocking their path. The other men argued, voices rising, but he stood between them and her, a silent shield. In the end, they left, muttering curses, their footsteps fading down the hall. The alien girl stared at him. Her breath caught in her throat. She whispered, almost afraid of the answer, "Why protect me from your own people?" He looked at her for a long time, then answered simply, "Because cruelty is not strength." Her claws trembled against the floor. Again, the words twisted her heart. Her people would call him weak for sparing her, but she had seen his strength unshaken. Even when facing his own kind, he had chosen mercy not just once, but again and again, even when it cost him respect from his people. That night, as she wrapped herself in the blanket he had given her, she could not stop thinking, not about the fear, not about her chains, but about him, the silent human who shielded her when he had no reason to, the human who made her question everything she believed. And though her lips never formed the words aloud, her heart whispered them into the shadows. Perhaps the galaxy was wrong about humans. The silence of the cell was no longer empty. It carried his presence, his words, his choices, and in that silence, something fragile and dangerous grew. Not trust, not yet, but the first thread of a bond that neither chains nor fear could break. The day of judgment came without warning. The alien girl had been pulled from her cell, her chains unlocked for the first time since her capture. Her legs trembled as she was forced to walk down the bright steel corridors of the human warship. 2 guards flanked her on either side, their eyes cold. Their weapons ready. She thought this was the end, that the humans had finally grown tired of their game. But when the doors opened, she was not dragged to an execution chamber. She was led into a vast hall, filled with humans and alien envoys alike. Holographic displays floated in the air, showing the faces of leaders from across the galaxy. It was a council meeting, the kind her people spoke of only in whispers, and she, a chained prisoner, stood at its center. Her chest tightened as countless eyes fell on her. Whispers spread like fire through the crowd. Some voices hissed with disgust, others with fear. Why is she alive? One alien delegate muttered, "Humans devour their enemies, yet this one still breathes." Her heart pounded, and for a brief moment, she almost wished the stories had been true. At least then her fear would have been simple. Then he entered. The armored human, the silent guardian who had brought her food and blankets. He walked to her side without hesitation, his presence commanding the entire hall. The noise died down as he raised his head, his visor reflecting the council lights. "This prisoner is alive," he declared, "because mercy is stronger than fear." Gasps rippled through the chamber. Leaders leaned forward, their eyes sharp with disbelief. A warrior race had been spared, not destroyed. And that act alone shattered centuries of stories. Aliens who had always painted humans as beasts now faced a truth they could not deny. Here was a living example, breathing proof that humans chose compassion where others would choose blood. The alien girl trembled, her claws digging into her palms. She wanted to speak, to scream, to tell the galaxy what she had seen in her cell. But her voice caught in her throat. Instead, she looked up at him, the soldier who stood unshaken before the council. His words echoed across the chamber again, steady and unyielding. "Strength is not found in devouring the weak. Strength is found in protecting them." The silence that followed was heavier than any chain. Some delegates looked furious, their faces twisted in anger. Others looked shaken, whispering among themselves. She could feel it, the balance of the galaxy shifting right in front of her eyes. One alien leader sneered, his voice sharp. "This is weakness. Human mercy will be your downfall." But the soldier stood taller, his voice unwavering. "No," he replied. "Mercy will be our legacy." The words struck like lightning. The galaxy had always feared humanity because of their strength, their speed, their cunning in battle. But this moment revealed something far more terrifying. They were not only capable of war, but of mercy. And that made them unpredictable, unstoppable. The alien girl finally found her voice, weak but clear. "My people told me humans devour the helpless," she said softly, her words carrying across the chamber. "But I stand alive because one human chose otherwise." Her statement cut through the air like a blade. Gasps filled the hall again. She saw it in their faces, confusion, doubt, and fear. The fear not of monsters, but of beings who could change the very rules of power. For the first time, she realized her survival was not only about her, it was about the message her life carried. The galaxy was watching, and her existence had become proof that the old stories were wrong. The council ended in chaos, some leaders calling for her execution, others demanding negotiations. But through it all, the human never left her side. He walked her back to the ship's corridors, his silent steps steady, and as the doors closed behind them, she turned to him and whispered, her voice trembling, "You have changed everything." He did not answer, but she thought she saw his head dip just slightly, as if he understood that the galaxy would never be the same, not because of blood spilled, but because of the mercy he had shown. The galaxy gathered once more. The council chamber burned with light, holograms flickering as hundreds of leaders watched the trial unfold. At the center stood the alien girl, her chains gone but her body trembling. Beside her stood the human soldier, tall and silent, his presence unshaken. Whispers filled the air like a storm. Some called her a traitor, Others called her proof. Every eye turned to the two figures who had defied centuries of fear and legend. The fate of more than one world rested on what happened next, her people's. Delegates rose first, voices sharp as blades. "This prisoner belongs to us," they declared. "She must be judged by her own kind. Her life must end for her shame." The alien girl's chest tightened, every word pressing against her heart like iron. Once, she would have bowed her head, accepted her fate, believed death was her only honor. But not now. Not after what she had seen, not after the human's mercy had broken her fear. She raised her head, her voice shaking but strong enough to carry across the chamber. "You call me weak because I live," she said. "But I tell you this living takes more courage than dying." Gasps spread through the crowd, her words sharp, defiant. Unstoppable. Her claws trembled, but she did not lower her eyes, not this time. The delegates shouted in fury, but she cut across them. "You taught me humans were monsters," she cried. "You said they would devour me, but this one chose mercy when he could have chosen blood." She turned, looking up at the soldier beside her. "He protected me, not for gain, not for power, but because he believed compassion is strength." The chamber fell into silence. Her words struck deeper than any blade could, across the galaxy. Countless beings watching the broadcast saw her standing alive, defying both fear and death. She was no longer a prisoner, no longer a victim. She was a voice that could not be silenced. The human stepped forward then, his voice low but resonant. "We do not devour the helpless," he said firmly. "We protect them." The words carried across the hall, heavy with conviction. Not just a statement, but a vow, and in that moment, the galaxy shifted. Some saw weakness in his mercy, others saw terror in his strength. Because a species capable of war was dangerous, but a species capable of mercy was unpredictable, unstoppable. Mercy could change enemies into allies, slaves into survivors, fear into loyalty. That power was more frightening than any weapon. Her people shouted for her death, but their voices were drowned in the storm that followed. Alliances shifted, leaders argued, and the chamber erupted with conflict. But through it all, she and the human stood together, a symbol no one could erase. When the council adjourned in chaos, the two walked out side by side. She trembled, her heart pounding, but she whispered softly to him, "You have changed everything." He turned his head slightly, his visor catching the light. "No," he said, his voice steady. "We have." For the first time since her capture, she felt the weight of her chains lift, not the iron ones, but the chains of fear and lies that had bound her since birth. She was no longer the girl who waited for death in a dark cell. She was something new, something dangerous to the old order. She was proof. The galaxy would remember this day, not for blood spilled, but for mercy chosen. Not for a war declared, but for a bond formed in silence. And the choice of one human soldier, echoed by one alien girl, shook the stars themselves.